Vital programs that folks rely on are heading toward insolvency, and our economy isn't growing nearly as fast as it should be. If we maintain this status quo, we're going to have a future of less opportunity and less security for the American people. So it's clear. It's clear that we need to move in a different direction, and that requires new ideas that can actually deliver real positive results.
That is House Committee Chairman Tom Price, who oversees the budget, in opening remarks on Wednesday at a hearing about that subject. Welcome into our program for this Friday morning. The president's proposed budget certainly has raised the ire of many Americans because, according to a lot of folks I listen to, it is a proposal that raises taxes, adds to the national debt, and never, ever balances. With this morning's View from the Hill, we are pleased to be joined by that good gentleman, Tom Price. He's on the telephone. And from Newsmax, Washington, my old congressional colleague, the former congressman from Illinois, Patrick Flanagan. To you both, good morning. Tom, let's get to it.
Good morning, J.D.
It's great to have you, pal.
Thanks.
What's the problem with what the president is proposing?
We have two big problems. One is that it's the kind of policies that haven't worked and have resulted in the slowest recovery coming out of an economic downturn ever. And the second problem is that it's exactly as you described. It's a budget that never balances, more taxes, more borrowing, more spending. And to put a real face on it, every dollar that's used for taxes and every dollar that's used for borrowing is a dollar that the American people can't use to buy a house, to pay rent, to pay a mortgage, to buy a car, to send their kid to college. So all the things that the American people want to do in their lives are harmed by the president's budget. We just think there's a better way.
Mike Flanagan, you often translate the political language of Chicago. Can you translate the numbers? What's the thinking behind this budget proposal from the president?
I got a lot of votes to buy. That's the thinking behind the president. $2 trillion in additional spending and taxes from those who don't pay their fair share to back it up. That's the way out. That's the way we talk about it. It's always easier to talk about more spending, and it's always harder to control yourself fiscally. If you remember, J.D., Mr. Clinton never sent us a balanced budget or a budget that ever went to balance, but today takes great bows for having presided over a balanced budget and surpluses. It's not the way of administrations, and it's certainly not the way of the Chicago guys.
Well, so the Chicago crowd is in charge of the executive branch. Tom Price, you're in charge of the budget committee. You also have a seat on Ways and Means. What happens next with the mechanics of the budget process, especially what your committee will be working on?
Well, our budget committee will work through the specific pieces of a budget, and we'll come up with our budget that we will balance. We will have a budget that balances. We'll lay out a plan for saving and strengthening and securing Medicare and Medicaid, the health and retirement programs for our country, and we'll introduce something that the president seems to disdain, and that is pro-growth policies, positive tax reform, positive energy policy, positive things to make this economy rolling again so that we can create more jobs and more opportunity. That timeline, we'll complete that likely by the end of March.
Well, Congressman, when you were going through the litany of things that are deprived from the American public when government takes their money, one of the things that you might have left off the list is the money that goes to employees for better jobs and the monies that employers spent on hiring. We've seen some pretty scary, large increases in employment, which are, at least the head of Gallup says, are fallacious. What's the government's view on that, and what are we going to do to try and get people back into good jobs?
Well, the president and his administration tout these what they call good numbers. The fact of the matter is that growth in our economy is actually down and continues on a downward trajectory. So much so that the average growth rate in our economy is about 3.3% over the past 50 years. The projections now are that we'll grow at 2.3%. What does that mean? That means that every single year we will lose about $3 trillion worth of growth in our economy, which is real jobs for real people. So the kinds of things that we think ought to be done, that is tax reform and energy policy and a health care policy that makes sense for patients and families and doctors, those things aren't being promoted by the president. All he's doing is trying to raise taxes so that he can increase spending. That's a program that does not work, hasn't worked, won't work this time.
You can appreciate, Mr. Chairman, since you're dealing with the federal budget, we have to budget time here. And I want you to think about this as we're heading to the break, Tom Price. We are hearing talk that the student loan program has a shortfall of billions of dollars, that there's a little provision tucked into what the president sent up the other day. I want to talk more about that, what it's actually costing the American people, and what has happened to student loans since the government took that over. That's something that doesn't get a lot of attention, but we're going to offer some attention when we come back following this time out.
Today I'm sending Congress a budget that will make sure you've got what you need to achieve your mission. It gives you the resources you need to carry out your mission in a way that is smart and strategic and makes the most of every dollar. It's also a broader blueprint for America's success in this new global economy.
President Obama, speaking of the Department of Homeland Security, trumpeting his budget. We talked about a blueprint, really more blue skies, but the bottom line is maybe blue skies rhetorically, but it's red ink financially. Let's continue our conversation. We're so pleased to be joined by the chairman of the House Budget Committee, Tom Price of Georgia, and of course our co-host this hour, former Illinois Congressman Michael Patrick Flanagan. Tom, we touched on it briefly before the break. One of the areas just hemorrhaging red ink is the whole realm of student loans. What on earth is going on?
Well, this president is giving the country the blues. That's what he's doing. And this was all predictable. As people will remember, 6-8 years ago, when Pelosi was in charge of the House and the president was in his first couple years, they fashioned a way for the government to literally take over student loans in this country. And what that means is that we went from about 80 to 90% of student loans being provided in the private sector, where the students had choices, where families had choices, where they had flexibility, to the public sector, where the federal government was dictating exactly what the terms were, and consequently driving up the cost for tuition and driving up the cost for students. And now these are backed up, no surprise, by the taxpayer. The taxpayer is going to be on the hook for over $20 billion, and that number's rising by the day. So this is just another government boondoggle. It's as my good friend Mike Flanagan says, it's the Chicago way, and it is. It's the government's going to decide for you what's best, and everybody knows that the government doesn't know what's best for you.
Yeah, Michael, they took this thing over like reflexively when they had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and they continue to use this almost like patronage dough.
It is like patronage. It's an endless need for liberals to be thanked for what they do. They spend their lives in the public sector and they don't have the opportunity to actually have any real success in their lives. So they need the world to thank them for the work they've done, and they do that by giving away other people's money. I mean, that's the rationale at work, particularly in Chicago. That's why they're almost broke there. Chairman, I have a short question for you. The president has asked for $2 trillion more in spending over the next few years. Certainly the House is not going to do that, but the Senate is always the trouble in passing the final appropriations for this. What sort of problems do you foresee in the near future over the course of the spring and the summer with the Senate and the appropriators?
Well, we're looking much more hopeful because we've got a Republican Senate now. But as you know, Michael, that doesn't always mean great things will come out once the Senate gets a hold of it. But I'm working very closely with Mike Enzi, who's the chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate. We believe we will both have a budget that will get to balance. We believe that we'll be able to what's called conference that budget, meaning the Senate and the House get together and agree on a common budget. That's important so that we can move pieces of legislation to the president's desk with just 51 votes instead of 60 in the Senate. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to go forward, but it's a challenge every day here in Washington, as you well know.
Tom, let me return to the venue at which the president spoke the other day and the spending area in terms of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, that plays out kind of, I won't say independent of budget authority, but you're working ahead prospectively on a new budget. We postponed the exact spending, the appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security. In your opinion, with the minute 30 that's left, what's going to happen with that contentious area?
This is really troubling, J.D., because as the people will recall, we passed the spending bills and decreased spending in December. But what we did was held out the Department of Homeland Security, trying to hold the president to account for his illegal actions in the area of immigration. And what we hoped would happen was that we would get some Democrats who would actually wake up in the Senate and support our efforts to hold the president to account and limit his capability or authority in what he believes he's doing in immigration. We haven't had a single Democratic senator stand up and be counted and listen to their constituents. So we're really troubled by what's going on in the Senate, and I call on my Senate colleagues to hold their colleagues' feet to the fire and make certain that we can get we need 6 Democrat senators to wake up and represent their constituents and not their politics or their president.
So in other words, 60 votes needed in the Senate, that becomes the barrier, and certainly it'll be contentious in the days ahead dealing with that funding for Homeland Security. No doubt, Tom, the way I try to offer the analogy is with the budget, you're making out the grocery list. The appropriators actually get to do the shopping, but we hope and we know in your hands in the House it will be a wise, prudent, and financially sound grocery list, if you will, as you make out the budget. Sir, you have our thanks. We really appreciate it. Mike Flanagan will return, and we will talk about his personal perspective on what's happening in terms